Hello, everybody. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. My name's Brandon Adams, and it is great to have you with us here today. We're going to get Jeff Sentell coming up in just a moment. A lot of recruiting stuff to get into with Jeff, both in terms of what's happening around the SEC, what's about to maybe happen with Georgia. We'll do a lot of that with Jeff Sentell on our program here coming up. I also want to set this up for when Jeff joins us in just a minute. I thought we had a very interesting episode of the Cover 4 broadcast yesterday afternoon, the DawgNation video channels, myself, Jeff Sentell, Connor Riley, Mike Griffith. We were making bold predictions for the upcoming season, and a lot of this was player related. And I thought it was really interesting that if you give all of us a chance to make a couple of bold predictions, it just so happens that none of us made a prediction on Georgia running backs. At least at the very end of the show, running backs didn't really come up at all. So what we're going to do for our podcast audience today, what we'll kind of set up for you here is, DeAndre Swift, when he joined us on DawgNation Appreciation a couple of weeks ago, he had some really nice things to say about this next generation of Georgia running backs. He's very high on what Zamir White's going to be able to do. James Cook mentions Kenny McIntosh by name. Obviously, he also is anticipatory for what Kendall Milton brings to the table. So DeAndre Swift has said some good things about the Georgia running backs for the upcoming season. And I think it'll be fun to kind of focus in on that today and kind of focus in on what our expectations are for Georgia running backs. We'll do some of that, as I said, with Jeff Sentell here in just a moment. Before we get to that, let me remind you that DawgNation Daily is brought to you today by our friends at Kroger. And Kroger right now is offering free pickup, so you can shop online. You can choose a pickup time that's convenient for you, and then Kroger will carefully pick up your order and bring it to your vehicle when you arrive. So really good, very convenient stuff for Kroger. Right now, I was at the Kroger location near where I live in Alpharetta again the other day, and just amazing the work they're doing to keep those shelves stocked, keep the store clean. And now with that very convenient pickup opportunity when you order online, just a great way for you to gain more peace of mind as you do business with them. We're huge fans of our friends at Kroger and really, really grateful for the work that they're doing right now to make the shopping experience enjoyable and just kind of comforting, knowing that we're able to put food over on our family's table and everything that kind of goes along with that. With that in mind, let me get ready to bring in Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to him about a number of subjects, number of topics, including this off the top about the Georgia running backs. Jeff, thanks for spending some time with us here today. We appreciate you being with us.
Hey, man, what's up? Happy Friday, everybody. And good to be here. Good to be talking Georgia football, Georgia recruiting. Can't wait to get to it, Brandon.
So let me begin this way. I mentioned our Cover 4 broadcast and the fact that really for the most part, giving, each of us a chance to kind of make some bold predictions of the upcoming season. We didn't hear a lot about Georgia running backs yesterday. So our podcast audience has gotten a chance to hear today, our radio audience as well, what DeAndre Swift recently said about his thoughts about that next generation, the Zamirs, the Kendall Miltons, the Kenny McIntoshes, the James Cooks. I mean, I have said that that I think that there is, some questions about this group this year. Probably go into the season maybe knowing less about Georgia running backs than we have, in a good number of years. And yet there is still a lot of talent in that position group. What do you think about the Georgia running backs for the upcoming season? What specifically do you expect from them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Brandon, when we're trying to entertain and enlighten and kind of go out on a limb a little bit. You don't think Georgia running backs like Brandon. I don't know how spicy people would think it if one of our team members rolled out that, Zamir White will have 1,300 yards rushing this year. I don't know if that would have been bold as much as Georgia will have 2,000-yard rushers. I don't see that happening, Brandon. I see Zamir being the lead back. He should be. I keep coming back to all these stories I've always heard that come back to me regarding Zamir and how DeAndre Swift and Zamir White worked as hard as anybody on the football team for the past 2 or 3 years at their craft and at their bodies. I think Zamir's role will kind of look a lot like, I guess I can kind of see like a Josh Jacobs type role, maybe Elijah Holyfield. Got to remember, folks, if Elijah can get to 1,000 yards running behind the Georgia line 2 seasons ago, Zamir can definitely do the same. And I just think, everybody's got these right here, Brandon, right? With James Cook. I know everybody is on the promise train and the hype train and the hope train for James Cook for some time, but you got to believe if anybody's going to be diversified in the Monken offense, that can kind of be the blueprint for what Georgia wants to show Donovan Edwards to come join the program. Donovan Edwards, if you don't follow recruiting as much as that man in the beard does right there, he's the new feature back target, the number 1 target, I believe, for Georgia running back remaining in this cycle. And I think if Georgia could show a 600, 700-yard rushing season,
A really good answer. All right,
I'm
and
waiting
he's
for
back
Georgia.
now. Jeff, go ahead. Oh, Lord.
Brandon.
All right, Jeff, can you hear us okay? Do you have us okay here? All right, so you were saying something along the lines of James Cook having a 600 or 700-yard season. Would you mind just summing up the final part of your answer there?
Yeah, I think what benefit Georgia in terms of the new look and the new offense and the Monken offense is not so much a 1,200-yard season from a back, but maybe a guy like James Cook specifically, if he can get 600, 700 on the ground and then also 600, 700 through the air, be that all-purpose threat that maybe gets to 1,400 yards in a different way.
Here's the one thing I thought was interesting about Cook, and I don't want to read too much into this, but I did think it was interesting that when Georgia coach Kirby Smart was on an Atlanta radio station a couple of weeks ago, he actually mentioned Cook by name in terms of the playmakers that Georgia might try to be getting involved. And let's face it, through Cook's first couple of years on campus in Georgia, getting him regularly involved in the offense has not been an easy thing for UGA to do. And yet, I will say that when I think about what excites me about Todd Monken, it is maybe the creativity necessary to use players like Cook because, Cook is not traditional. Georgia has been very much a traditional SEC-style power running game, especially what we're used to seeing over the course of the last decade plus around the SEC. It just takes a little more wherewithal to kind of get a guy like Cook involved. The fact that Smart mentioned him by name, I thought was kind of enticing. The fact that we think that these are the kinds of things that Monken might be good at. I'm a little higher on Cook going into the beginning of this year than I probably would have been in terms of his projection going into the beginning of last year.
Yeah, I think here's a prism or a filter, maybe we can call it a kaleidoscope, to look at Georgia football for the next few cycles, especially when recruit goes from prospect to signee to freshman to contributor. I think you're going to see a lot more, maybe the Alabama model, where a lot of these big players for Georgia don't really show up as a impact contributor until sophomore, junior year. And then they have two really good seasons where the junior year is the resume season for the NFL. I think a lot of guys are going to end up waiting their time. I can identify a lot of guys like this. Jamari Salyer would be a guy that waits his turn. You see Zamir White, you see James Cook. Maybe there's a receiver in that mix like a Demetrius Robertson or a Karis Jackson that finally maybe everyone wants to see them go ahead and flourish and play like Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens did as freshmen. But especially along the lines of scrimmage where those grown men operate and dwell, I think you're going to see a lot of Georgia players really flap their wings sophomore, junior season rather than be that instant impact guy that everyone hopes to see.
Let's talk a little bit of recruiting here for a moment. I want to start with some Tennessee recruiting. It's obviously been a nice run for the Vols as of late. Terrence Lewis gets commitment there, 5-star linebacker out of Florida. Dylan Brooks, 5-star pass rusher out of the state of Alabama. That was a very interesting recruiting win, just given the big boys that Tennessee knocked off to get him. Kamar Wilcoxon, one-time Florida commit, now committed to the Tennessee Vols there as well. Jeff, my theory on this is there's a lot of internet chatter on this week, and I think you see two distinct camps emerge. You see, I think some people overstating the Tennessee recruiting wins here on the basis of, hey, it's 5-star guys, but the overall collection of talent in the 2021 class for Tennessee is still, not necessarily going to be number one class by the end of the season. And then on the other side of this, I think you have some people who are understating what Tennessee's been able to put together over the last few days. And it's that part of this that's interesting to me because, Jeff, if you look at the last couple of years, we think of the SEC as this dominant recruiting conference. But the actual truth is there's only a small handful of schools that have had any recruiting wins to speak of the last few seasons. Obviously, Georgia gets pretty much its pick of the litter these days. Alabama does as well. Out west, you've seen Texas A&M and LSU have, really good recruiting classes. But the truth is LSU and Texas A&M don't overlap with Georgia all that much. A couple times for both schools, but not a ton for either one. But for Auburn, for Florida, for Tennessee as of late, for the most part, these have not been programs who generate a lot of major headlines with their recruiting wins. So the fact that Tennessee's doing that a little bit over the course of the last few days, even if it's not going to result in a top 5 class at the end of the year, and I don't believe that Tennessee finishes in the top 5 for the 2021 cycle. It is still, I will admit, for me, interesting for the moment.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what I see is kind of happened with Georgia, where they're recruiting the first couple of years under Kirby Smart. Remember how they built a lot of momentum early in April, May. Now, first of all, the COVID-19 template here is totally different. But I see a lot of these guys. I have this theory that I've populated on the DawgNation message board forum, Brandon, that I would love to see someone go back and do some research. But my hypothesis here, that's a big word for DawgNation Daily in the morning, huh? My hypothesis here is I see that I wonder how many of these COVID-19 quarantine commitments are actually going to stick. I think a lot of the folks that are committing right now are committing because they can secure a place in a class. Now, I think this is a little different with Tennessee's recruiting momentum, Brandon, because to me, it's not a true head-to-head big boys win. With Terrence Lewis, the recent five-star, right. I don't think they were going against Florida, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State for Terrence Lewis. Right. Tennessee just took advantage of maybe a rankings opportunity where Terrence Lewis is ranked really high. And then maybe the other big programs in the country, the Clemsons, the Georgias, the Alabamas, favor guys like Shmuel Munden and Barrett Carter, even though Terrence Lewis is a top 10 prospect and a top 15 prospect. Now, the Dylan Brooks guy out of Alabama, that was a guy that both Alabama and Auburn desperately wanted. But I don't know if desperate is the term for that as much as that he was high on their boards. You look at Georgia and Dylan Brooks was really never in the ring there trying to recruit him because they had their eyes on prizes like Dallas Turner, DeMond Robinson out of Maryland, who actually committed to Maryland. You hear more names like, they got Elijah Judy. That was an early priority. You hear names like Chaz Chambliss now out of Carrollton in terms of Georgia, what they're looking for at outside linebacker. With Terrence Lewis, I don't know if this is a huge puff your chest out win because it simply wasn't a recruiting victory compared to a lot of other big boys. A lot of the other big boys didn't have an evaluation as high on Terrence Lewis as other one. If you're looking for that arrival moment for Tennessee, I'd like to see them pulling Amarius Mims or pull very big names like that, like a Tony Grimes, somewhere like that. When they start pulling somebody away from a Georgia and Ohio State and a Clemson, that's in my mind's eye that will wake me up and stop hitting the snooze button on some of these Tennessee recruiting wins.
I got to follow up for you on this in a moment. Let me first remind folks, this is a great time to support the work being done by the UGA Alumni Association. University of Georgia has been now for quite some time really one of the centerpiece academic institutions in the entire country. And that means great work being done by staff members on campus, but it means really propelling a generation of UGA grads into the real world, and then they work in their own way to make the world a better place. And when you support the UGA Alumni Association and aid its efforts to support the University of Georgia, you are really making it possible for UGA to continue to be a change agent for the better around the country. And there are a few ways you can do, and really around the world as well, a few ways you can do that right now. Let me tell you about the Student Emergency Fund for students who find themselves in harm's way, financially, health-wise, whatever else during COVID-19. Your support of the Student Emergency Fund provides just a bedrock level of support for those UGA students maybe get themselves through a tough time. You can also support the work that UGA researchers are doing, scientists getting very close to breakthroughs. You may have read some of that yourself in news reports as of late. Well, good research requires funding. When you support the UGA Alumni Association, your funds help support that UGA research and the work that it's doing to help find a vaccine or a therapeutic for the COVID-19 virus. You can also become a mentor as well. For Georgia grads, those about to enter into the job market upon graduating from the University of Georgia, they may find themselves in tremendously uncertain times. The economy, everything else, the job market, it's weird right now. Well, when you kind of share your expertise, that learned experience, when you share that with a UGA student, you're really helping them facilitate their life in kind of a student world as a UGA graduate. A great way for you to get involved there as well. Also, so many of you on the front lines of the battle against COVID-19. The UGA Alumni Association would simply love to hear your story about how you're doing all of that. So let me give you a website to go to. If you're watching on video, you can see it on your screen. It's alumni.uga.edu/COVID-19. alumni.uga.edu/COVID-19. That's a way that you can get in touch with the UGA Alumni Association and support the work that it's doing to help the university in its continued battle against the coronavirus. Jeff, one more kind of point here on this Tennessee thing for a moment. I think two things are really interesting. First of all, you touched on part of this. And we saw this a couple of days ago when Ohio State also had some momentum. Georgia just sort of seems to operate in its own orbit. For the most part, we've seen some big recruiting wins during the coronavirus shutdown, but not that many of these players have necessarily been guys that Georgia was really linked to in any form or fashion. Maybe Wilcoxon was a little bit for Georgia, but to the recent Tennessee commitments, I'm not sure that really anybody had much of a Georgia time. However, if I'm Florida, and I know this kind of comes across as red meat to my audience because of all of our Gatorade stuff, but I mean this sincerely. If I'm Florida, I'm very much paying attention to this kind of thing, because when you add to this the rumor that Daniels, the former USC quarterback, may be going to Tennessee, and some of the other things that are going on, there is just a way of generating headlines that Jeremy Pruitt's found a way to do in Knoxville that so far Dan Mullen can't match. Now, Mullen's done pretty well bringing in transfers, and once again, in 2020, Florida's going to lean on transfers pretty heavily in order to remain competitive in the SEC. But when it comes to just generating player acquisition headlines, I feel like I see a lot more coming out of Knoxville than I see coming out of Gainesville.
Yeah, they just had more wins, Brandon. I mean, if you look at Quavarius Crouch, Wanye Morris, Tennessee's just had a better job of getting the 5-star prospect in than Florida. I think the thing for me, and I think some of our forum folks picked up on it, is, one thing I did, Brandon, I wrote about decommitments this week and how much of a trend it may or may not be across college football. And I inserted Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama into my study. And then I threw in Florida kind of as a control group, because say what you want about the red meat for your audience, but Florida has pristine facilities. They have the state of Florida. They have a great public school education. They've won in the past. They have Heisman Trophy winners. They have the profile and trajectory of someone that should be able to recruit like gangbusters and have a top 5 recruiting class every year. For some reason, Florida hasn't been able to do that. And I think a lot of that has had to do with they focus more on maybe short-term wins and then rather the long-standing recruiting relationships. Think about a couple things Georgia's been able to do over the last couple of years that really stood out to me. Is number one, there was the underground feeling that Georgia was the leader for a guy like Tyreek Stevenson for quite some time. The young man didn't need to commit. The young man wanted to wait on his All-American game moment. And Georgia landed a Tyreek Stevenson, who also happened to be a former Florida decommitment. Same thing with Keely Ringo. Georgia had strong momentum with Keely Ringo, and yet it weathered the storm in terms of, hey, we want to do this on your time. We want to work on a relationship. We don't need to put that 5-star up on the board right now so other recruits will take notice of us and we can get this train going down the track. I think Florida, the big staggering number I found during the last decade, Brandon, was that Florida's had 91 decommitments. Going all the way back to 2010. Now, Georgia's number was right at 49. Alabama's was at 58. Ohio State was 30. Clemson was 11. So you look at that, and the Gators are having a hard time holding on to commitments, whether it's a whole gamut of things, whether they take a kid too early, they have a poor evaluation, or they pressure a kid into an impulsive commitment that can't stick throughout the test of time. I think staying power, not so much short-term theatrics of like the booms that everybody wants to incite folks about on Twitter. I think that's the big thing with Florida's recruiting. Whereas, Tennessee, say what you want, they're the number 4 recruiting class in the country right now, and they're able to add some pieces. And if let's just say they do end up with JT Daniels, Brandon, to go along with the current quarterbacks they had coming back, also with Harrison Bailey, that's a vibrant quarterback room and a vibrant future. And it sort of feels like what Jim Chaney was able to do with Kirby Smart during the first couple of years of the Kirby Smart era.
All right, let's do some other recruiting talk here for a moment. You wrote recently about Maliki Mataveo, the tight end, and it seems interesting that obviously Georgia got a huge tight end win a cycle ago with Darnell Washington, and yet Georgia would appear to be solidly in the mix with Mataveo. It certainly seems like Brock Bowers is strongly considering Georgia there as well. After a major tight end win last season with Washington, it seems like Georgia's pretty solidly in the mix with a couple tight ends here for the 2021 cycle as well, including Mataveo, who you've recently written about.
Yeah, I think with Mataveo, I spoke to him, and it seems to me these things are clear. One, Georgia's going to take only one tight end in this cycle. And I think to me, it's either going to be Brock Bowers or Mr. Mataveo. So I think it's interesting what the timelines are linking up right now, Brandon, because Bowers feels that he's going to need a lot longer time. He's going to maybe need to go into the season and see what things are like. Maybe when restrictions lift, he needs to take a couple more visits. Maliki doesn't feel that way. Mataveo feels like he's going to have this thing done by June. He wants to have a bow on his recruiting so he can enjoy his senior year. And he doesn't think like he really is going to need a lot of visits. I mean, if he had to make a decision, he probably has one or two schools in mind. And I think for Georgia, if both of those guys say yes, that's going to be very interesting. But it might just be a circumstance where one guy says yes ahead of the other, and that solves Georgia's tight end recruiting matrix or puzzle for the 2021 cycle.
So you think that Georgia views them relatively evenly, that it would be first come, first serve, or do you think they have a preference between the two?
Yeah, that's just so hard, Brendan, because I know what the logical quick answer to say there, but Maliki even told me, is like, listen, man, if someone comes to me and says, hey, we want you, but we got to take one guy, and this guy's ready to go, what does this mean for you? Would you want to accelerate your decision in order to jump and be a part of this class? It didn't sound like to him that that's the way he's going to go about his recruiting. He's going to do it on his timeline, and when he feels it is right. There's not going to be an outside change agent or catalyst which will spark his decision. Very interesting, because I don't even know with Georgia and its needs. I put something on the forum up this morning about how I think that the offensive line number now is actually 5 for this class. I don't think it's 4. And especially if it's the right 4 that come after Micah Morris, who's already in the class. I don't know if Georgia will have the luxuries to turn that second tight end into a best player available unless there's something that happens with the depth chart currently in Athens.
Okay, so now you've got my curiosity. If you asked me who the 4 were, I think I could pick those. We've obviously talked, a lot about the Fairchilds and the Mims and the Terrence Fergusons to go along with Micah Morris. If it's a 5th, though, who does that become?
Yeah, there's a lot of names that are floating out there. One of the names out there is a kid out of Nashville, Tennessee, Noah Josie. He plays for Brentwood Academy, and Brentwood is probably like one of the gold standard programs of Tennessee high school football. His father played at Vanderbilt. It's about 6'5", it's about 305, and Brady's going to check a lot of the boxes. He's going to have 3.8 GPA. He only took the ACT one time as kind of a warm-up, Brandon. And much like yourself, he only needed to take it once, and he scored his 27 or 28, and he was out the door. Josie's a name that's coming up a lot. I don't think his timeline meshes well with a lot of the online chatter about imminency in terms of him and where he's at with Georgia, or even making his college decision. But Josie's a guy. You guys will read about him on the DawgNation.com flagship website shortly. But intriguing guy, fits a lot of the profiles for Georgia. He was one of those guys. Maybe we'll write more about that soon. Who went on one of those virtual tours with the Georgia staff, including some good FaceTime with Kirby Smart.
We'll also, I think, get a chance to read about Dallas Turner coming in at DawgNation.com as well. That's one of my favorite prospects for the class of 2021. That'll no doubt be fun to read. Jeff, we'll let you get going here. Thanks for spending some time with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Hope you have a very nice weekend. As I said before, we'll look forward to reading at DawgNation.com and speaking to you back here on our program again very soon there as well.
Hey, guys, great to be with you. You guys stay safe, stay well, and keep enjoying the rest of DawgNation Daily.
All right, good stuff there from Jeff Sentell. And by the way, thanks to our friends at Kroger for making all this possible here today. And, of course, I know a lot of you, as we kind of head towards this warmer time of year, you're staying at home. You got to find something fun to do. That means kind of spending some time out there on the patio a lot more. Kroger's got you kind of covered on this. Listen to this deal right now. You can save up to 40% off patio table sets, outdoor swings, lanterns, and more. That's at your local Kroger right now. I will say that I have definitely my back deck and everything like that, because the weather, the one saving grace through this whole lockdown has been, the fact that I've and my family have stayed healthy the entire time. And in addition to that, the weather's been really nice. We've been spending a lot of time on the back deck and front porch. And so that furniture, outdoor furniture from our friends at Kroger, great savings on that right now, up to 40% off. I'm also thinking there might be a little bit of a tie-in there as we get ready for Mother's Day there as well. I'm sure a lot of the mothers in your life would love nothing more than that. All right, we're going to roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down, get a lot of your comments here on both Facebook and YouTube. A little shorter version of that today. But we're going to go in there and kind of knock all that out. So we'll get ready to do that. Matt Rucavino, by the way, the subject of Tennessee, the one joke he's always enjoyed and I've always laughed at was, for such a long time, the Tennessee's fight song was Home for the Holidays. Tennessee did get back to a bowl last year. My belief on the Vols is, I think I've said this to y'all, they were better on the field than I expected them to be last year, and maybe not quite as good in recruiting as I would have expected them to be. This year, it's almost like the opposite is true. It certainly seems like Tennessee is getting ready to kind of put together the kind of class that you assume that Jeremy Pruitt would be able to put together. but I'm not quite so sure they maintain that on-field momentum this year as much as maybe some people expect them to. I think that maintaining that's going to actually be a little bit more difficult than some people might think. Let's see what else. Still, Jordan Wells, I guess, having a little trouble with his browser. Apologize for that. Really glad to have all of you with us here today, though. Let's go get a couple of YouTube comments. Going to see what's going on over there as well. See how folks are doing and having a good time over there. Jay Shipes, funny line. Killamime says, I wouldn't mind if Tennessee gets almost as good as Georgia. I don't know about that. I don't know how I feel about that. What are people talking about today? What do people want to discuss here for a moment as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down? Bank 6 says, I continue to say Dan Mullen is an elite coordinator at a big school who has an elite, who also has an elite head coach, but he's not himself an elite head coach at a big time school. He's perfect as a head coach at a school like Mississippi State. Yeah, I mean, listen, at some point in time, the expectation for Mullen, he's going to have to match it, right? He's going to have that big on-field performance at a place like Florida that justifies that. Mullen has kind of always been a little bit of a media darling because the media likes touting coaches that it thinks of as doing more with less. It makes them feel smart, I believe. And Mullen's a guy that they can somewhat do that with. So when you're at a place like Florida, as I said before, that's not a do more with less type of school the way that Mississippi State is. You're not a plucky underdog at Florida. You're expected to do more with more. You're expected to win national championships. 2 different Florida coaches have done that. Even I can admit that and give credit to the Gators for the success the program's been able to enjoy. And that's the standard that Mullen measures himself by. And I think that if Florida has another what has been typical Dan Mullen season this year, 10-2, 11-1, you're in the top 10, but you're not beating Georgia. You're not among the true playoff contenders. Let's watch and see what happens to that Mullen conversation after that. Let's watch that. Joe Simpson says about sharing carries at Georgia, that's great for their NFL future. I think it is. I think it's going to be interesting to watch a side-by-side comparison between 2 guys. Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin, DeAndre Swift coming out of Georgia. Taylor just had infinite more carries. I mean, just oodles and oodles of more carries than DeAndre Swift in his career. Swift was kind of always in a backfield that shared carries. He's a little bit more of the dominant individual force this past season, but shared carries in 2018. Third string in 2017 because of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. So there is not nearly as much wear and tear for DeAndre Swift as you would think there would be for Jonathan Taylor. Now Taylor is a very good running back, but let's watch and see if the work that Taylor has done thus far in his college career, let's see if that slows his development in the NFL because he's already been beaten on and banged on a little too much. I think that's worth watching. Of course, as we're doing all of this, we're in our R.S. Andrews cool down. Don't forget air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews can really solve all those problems for you. Those systems behind the walls in your house, you may not know how they work, but R.S. Andrews can take good care of them. Air conditioning, if your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can fix it for you the same day. You just need to find them online at rsandrews.com, and they'll take good care of you. Football fan says, Georgia fans talk about Florida all day long. They're definitely terrified. I think I can speak for a good number of Georgia fans that there is no terror. There is no terror in Georgia's mind when it thinks about Florida, a team that's beaten now 3 years in a row. John Beecham says, do we get any feedback from coaches as to whether the virtual tours are being well received? Are we impressing a recruit or overwhelming him? So, John, that's an interesting question because Kirby Smart has said now a couple of times that you do have to be careful with overwhelming the recruits because the coaches right now, to a degree, are a bit bored. And so talking to these recruits about all they have to do. And Smart, I think, on 3 different occasions has said, you want to be careful not to overwhelm recruits because of that. And I think that's a mindset worth paying attention to. However, in terms of how the virtual tours are going and kind of these sort of video conferencing meetings, we're going to hear more from the recruits themselves on that than the coaches. The coaches can't talk about recruits, and they're not going to give away too much information on that anyway. But for the most part, the recruits themselves will talk about some of this kind of stuff. In fact, I think you're going to read some of this from Jeff Sentell coming up in the days ahead at DawgNation.com of guys who, I mean, Jeff mentioned Josie a moment ago, guys who've had these video conference meetings with Georgia coaches and kind of how that compares to a regular on-campus meeting. I think some recruits are going to say it's not quite as enjoyable. Dallas Turner may say that, for instance. He wants the hands-on experience, boots-on-the-ground experience of being on campus. Other recruits seem to be learning what they need to learn throughout this entire process. So it's probably a mixed bag. And while the coaches themselves aren't going to speak much about this, the recruits, for the most part, are, I think, going to be pretty forthcoming about their experience. And you're going to read some of that at DawgNation.com in the days ahead. James Wade says Mason Smith, the 5-star defensive tackle, shaping up to be an LSU-Georgia battle. That's a player, as I'm sure you could probably expect, that I'd love to see Georgia get. I also think it's interesting that there's been at least some chatter of Mason and Corey Foreman wanting to play together. Most of the time, these sort of package deals with recruits end up not really materializing into much. But, yeah, definitely Mason Smith is a player that I have definitely had a lot of attention for. And if it does come down to that Georgia-LSU battle, I guess with Alabama trying to get involved here, that's going to be one worth watching. Courtney Fisher noticing the Rose Bowl shirt today. Yeah, I love this one there as well. I have, like so many of you, have so many great memories of the Rose Bowl. Courtney says, I was able to get a black hoodie last year. Love the design. The game was awesome. Yeah, this is, you can't really see the whole thing here, but it's super, super classy. You got like the red roses down here at the bottom. It's a cool T-shirt design. I don't always, to be completely frank, love the Nike gear, but I love this Nike T-shirt. I love it. Football Fan says that Mullen's a better in-game coach than Kirby Smart. I mean, how many years of not proving that have to happen before Florida fans stop saying that? I guess that'd be my question. But, do what you want. Let's see over here on Facebook some more. Facebook folks over here chatting and talking. Jermaine Dunbar says, who's going to be the backup for Jamie Newman here this year? So if I had to pick on that, I would probably pick Dwan Mathis. I think that, Mathis' athleticism maybe in comparison to Stetson Bennett. So this is all, of course, assuming that Mathis is healthy. I might take the edge over Mathis compared to Bennett because of the athleticism, the arm strength, things along those lines. And I would probably take Mathis over Beck because of the experience, having been on campus for a year. I think that gives Dwan Mathis a chance to learn a lot. Now, I think it's going to be an intense competition between all three of them. I wouldn't write out Bennett, wouldn't write off Bennett, wouldn't write off Beck, wouldn't write off, Dwan Mathis. It's going to be an intense competition. I don't have a wild degree of confidence that ends up being Dwan Mathis, but I've had to select someone to be the backup behind Jamie Newman. If he gets a full clear to play and participate, I would probably lean in Mathis' direction on that more so than others. That's just my best guess, though. Mike Zambiasi says that Mathis is his pick as well. I think that the experience of having been on campus for a year is the kind of thing for him that you just can't discount. That you learn a lot by doing that. You get comfortable by doing that. And plus, there's a element of leadership involved for a quarterback. And having been on campus gives the teammates a chance to just know him a little bit better, be more familiar with him. There's a chance that Mathis, because of the health situation he's overcoming, may make him a little bit more of a popular player with his teammates. And that leadership may help him a good bit. We're going to get ready to wrap up here today, let you get a little bit of an early start to your Friday. Make sure you check out the AJC for Atlanta news now. Continue to follow the state's reopening, shelter in place, I believe, coming to an end, everything kind of going on there. Also, join us for the podcast version. We'll have more on DeAndre Swift, talking about these Georgia running backs, and kind of everything else from a fun Friday here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. On our way out the door, I'll also remind you, Gatorade Updater stands at 1,280 days. That's a good piece of news here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We look forward to seeing that number continue to climb. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. You'll have a great weekend. We'll look forward to being back with you again on Monday, and we'll talk to you then, everybody.